Jane Van Lennep, and I'm one of the founder directors of Simple System. This is a horse feed company dedicated to feeding the horse according to the way it evolved and the food that it ate during its long and successful evolution out on the grassy plains, evolving as an obligate herbivore for the last 30 million years. A very successful creature, doing really well. What we're going to do today is look at the horse's digestive system and how it copes with that forage diet that it's evolved so well to manage. I call this presentation From Bucket to Barrow because we all know about the expensive bucketfuls that we lag to the front end, and we know about all the barrow loads of muck that come out of the other end. But what happens in between can be a little bit of a mystery. So hopefully that's what we're going to address now. So the horse's digestion starts in the mouth, and to illustrate that I've got a meat mincer. We can put a steak in the top of the mincer, wind the handle, I'm afraid that fell off, and out comes mince. But this will only work well if we get everything together in the right order and it's correctly tensioned and we wind it properly. And thus it is with the horse's teeth grinding up the forage that they eat from the ground. The horse has got muscles to can retract the lower jaw, but not to move it forward. So when the horse is grazing and his head's down, he's a grazer, food is on the ground, his lower jaw slips slightly forward and all his teeth are in the right alignment to wear evenly while he's chewing that food. If we find our horse out on his grassy treeless plain, nice Mr. Horse, doing so well, but we're going to put you in a 12x12, and by the way, the hay net's up there. Things start to go wrong for our beautifully evolved horse because his lower jaw will slip back when his head's up, his teeth no longer align correctly, and so very many domesticated horses have problems with sharp bits on their teeth, on the outside of the top teeth, the inside of the bottom teeth, a hook at the front of the top teeth and a ramp at the back of the bottom teeth. And these are in part due to our not respecting the horse as a grazer that eats with its head down. So always try and feed your horse from floor level as much as you can, and his teeth, if nothing else, will be in better condition. Now, while the horse is chewing away at his forage, he's grazing, he's also producing saliva. In the natural course of events, the horse will be grazing for about 16 hours a day. So he's producing saliva for 16 hours a day. And the amount of saliva he produces is actually quite impressive. And it will fill 4 of my supplement buckets. So I'm going to put these buckets out to illustrate the amount of digestive juices a horse produces during the course of one day. So these are 10-litre buckets, and the horse produces between 36 and 42 litres of saliva a day. Now, compared with our saliva, the horse's saliva hasn't got much in the way of digestive enzymes. Enzymes break down soluble nutrients, sugars, starch, protein, fats and so on. Horse's natural diet doesn't have much of these, so he doesn't produce much in the way of enzymes. Nature isn't wasteful. So the horse's saliva isn't breaking down the nutrients in his diet, but it is lubricating this coarse food that he eats. It's very slimy, and it also has lots of bicarbonate in it. If you remember your chemistry lessons, you'll know that bicarbonate neutralizes acid. So hold that thought. The horse only produces saliva when he's chewing. In the natural course of events, he's chewing for about 16 hours a day, and the saliva he produces is a lot. So he chews up his food to about 2 millimetre particles if his teeth are in good condition, and he will swallow boluses of his food mixed with all that saliva that go down his esophagus. Well, it's a bicycle inner tube, but it'll do for now. The point about my bicycle inner tube is it's quite flexible, and the horse's esophagus is flexible as well. So when he swallows, and for an average sort of 500 kilo horse, maybe a recycled racehorse, that's going to be about 500 grams or mils at a time. That's about a pint. So as the food with all that saliva goes down his esophagus, you can actually see a bulge going down his neck. There's so much of it. So the horse is grazing, his head is naturally down, and although it may seem difficult for food to go uphill, that is actually better because the esophagus is going to be more or less in a smooth curve from his head to his stomach. If we give the horse a hay net, we'll feed him with his head up. We've now got a bend in his throat and a bend where the esophagus goes through his chest. So that must be better than that. That's our esophagus. Put that over there. So the food then travels down the esophagus, goes between the shoulder blades and into the horse's stomach. And we've all been taught that the horse's stomach is small, and to illustrate the horse's stomach today, I've got a rather battered recycled organic cider vinegar bottle. Why does the horse have a small stomach, we might ask ourselves? Well, for me, the answer is because the horse hasn't got horns. If the horse is able to defend itself with horns like cattle would, it doesn't need to run away so fast. So if the cows are threatened by a predator, they can form a circle around the babies, their horns at the ready, and any predator can get skewered on that if they're brave enough to try it. Now, the horse doesn't have horns. He's got to be able to run away from his predators, and very successful at that he is too. But if he has a small stomach that empties frequently, he's not having too much bulk occupying space that is needed by his lungs and his heart for that flight. So the horse's stomach is small because he hasn't got horns. It's situated quite well forward in the horse's body, more or less halfway between where you sit on your horse and his heart, which is between your feet. So that's the horse's little stomach. Pop that on there for now. In the stomach, acidic stomach juices are being produced constantly. So remember I said that the saliva was only produced when the horse was chewing, but the acidic stomach juices are produced all the time. So there's no stop when the horse isn't chewing. And I'm going to put out another 4 buckets that will illustrate the amount of stomach acid that is produced in a day. So, the stomach juices are acidic, the saliva has got bicarbonate in it to neutralise acid. Good idea, produced in equal amounts, but only so long as the horse is chewing for a sufficient length of time. So when we come along and give the horse concentrated feed that doesn't need so much chewing, he's getting his calories, that's fine, but he isn't getting the chew time, so he isn't producing sufficient saliva to neutralise all that acid. So immediately we're in a situation where the horse is having too much acid in the stomach, and this will predispose the horse to stomach ulcers. That acid is in there, it's going right through the horse's system. He will also get problems further down the line if there's not enough saliva to neutralise the acid that he's making in the stomach. When the horse is eating forage, is grazing, or is eating hay, or is eating, say, Lucy nuts, or is pure beet, the stomach will never get over full. It gets to a certain point, and every few minutes it will discharge the excess. So it likes to keep the level between about 1/3 full and 2/3 full. If we give the horse starchy food, which he isn't adapted to eat, and he doesn't have the enzymes to break it down, so if we're giving the horse a starchy cereal meal, we won't give him anything else to eat after the meal, and we won't work him, because what we want to try and do is keep that starch in the stomach for as long as possible to get the maximum chance of breaking down the starch in that feed with a limited amount of amylase that the horse produces. So that's the reason why we have some of the rules of feeding, and why if you're feeding the horse more naturally, a lot of those rules just no longer apply. So the food goes into the stomach, gets mixed up with the acid in there. Similar thing happens with rabbits, and their digestive system is quite like a horse's, but then they're both deer creatures. They live in family groups, they eat grass and run away from predators. So rabbits are just mini horses, and horses are just big rabbits. So from the stomach, the food goes into the small intestine, and to illustrate the small intestine, I've got a lot of yellow hose pipe. This hose pipe, if I spread it all out, would be 20 metres. And that is the correct length of the horse's small intestine. So if you're keen on dressage, you'll know that will go across your dressage arena from B to E. That's a lot of small intestine. Compared with some other species, it's actually quite short. A cow has 40 metres of small intestine, and our small intestine is about 11 times our body length from crown to rump, and the horse's small intestine is about 8 times its body length. So relatively small, but still very impressive. I should mention, however, that the horse's actual small intestine isn't yellow. So don't get confused there. And the actual small intestine is quite a bit fatter than this, but my hosepipe illustrates it. In order for the horse's relatively coarse food to get through the small intestine without any problems, it does need to be a lot runnier than this. And so the next thing that happens as the food goes through the duodenum is that bile is added to it. Bile is very strong stuff, so we only need a couple of bucketfuls of bile. So bile is made by the liver, and like stomach acid, it's being produced all the time. The only way we can slow down production of the bile is to starve the horse for about 48 hours, and I don't suggest you do that because it ain't good for them. So there's strong old bile. I mean, you know what bile's like. It's what comes up after the lager and the curry. If it's children listening, it's after too much chocolate ice cream. So strong old stuff, the bile. That's produced in the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine. And we have a strange situation here that if it happens that the horse hasn't got much food in his stomach because we haven't fed him lately, and he's got a load of acid building up in his stomach, there's nothing in the duodenum except the bile that is produced by the liver. The valve that operates between the stomach and the small intestine can become incompetent, it doesn't work, and it allows bile to backflow into the stomach from the duodenum. Because the bile is so strong, I mean, as we know, it can take the skin off your teeth, it will cause an ulcer just inside that pyloric valve. So if we're working our horse on an empty stomach, we're sloshing up acid in his stomach, that can cause squamous ulcers. And even if he's not working, if he's just in the stable and he hasn't had anything to eat for a long time, he can get pyloric ulcers because there's backflow of bile from the duodenum into the stomach. So, small intestine, lots of twists and turns. Most of it is fitted into the left-hand side of the horse. And to get the food through there successfully and safely, it needs to be between 90 and 95% liquid. So we've got a little bit more to add to our digestive juices. And the last lot is produced by the pancreas, which is a little bit further down the duodenum. And that's another about 35 litres. So I've got 4 more buckets to go out. So our complete stack of buckets now represents the entire quantity of digestive juices produced by the glands accessory to the digestive tract in 24 hours, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it's impressive. And if you're thinking, my gosh, my horse would never drink that much in a day, don't worry, the horse is clever, he recycles it, so he doesn't need to drink this much a day because he can recycle it. From the small intestine, which is very quick, what the horse wants to do is to get the food from his mouth to his back end, if you like, as quickly as possible, so it's well away from his heart and lungs because it's so important to him to be able to flee from predators. So the important bit, the interesting bit of his digestive system is the hind gut. And the first part of the hind gut I'm going to illustrate with this old feed bag. And this illustrates the cecum, which lies inside the horse's right flank. And it is indeed like a big sack. It holds between 25 and 35 litres. So those water carriers that we take to shows are 25 litres. So that would go in there. About the same size as a 9-year-old child, to give it some perspective. So let's pop that there. Once the food enters the hind gut, it slows right down. Instead of liquid being added, liquid is now being withdrawn. And along with that liquid, dissolved nutrients and salts, which we call electrolytes. The soluble nutrients in the diet are being taken out by the enzymes, but as we know, that isn't very much in horse diets. What remains is the fibre from the horse's forage, and that's broken down by innumerable microbes that live in the horse, mainly in the horse's hindgut. There are some in the foregut as well, but mainly in the hindgut, and there are literally trillions of them. And these microbes, bacteria, fungi, yeasts, all sorts of microorganisms, will break down the fibre that the horse eats and turn it into nutrients. So they will produce things called free fatty acids, which go down slow burn energy pathways, giving the horse stamina. And they also produce all the horse's B group vitamins and vitamin K. So these gut bugs are really, really useful. They create heat as they're doing their fermentation, so it's a similar process to that that's going on in your muck heap. And there's no better job on a cold day in the winter than sorting out the muck heap, because it's the warmest place on the yard. So similar process to that, creating lots of heat, so it's like central heating for the horse, but they're also producing a certain amount of gas, which is normal, but it's why horses are a bit farty sometimes. If you put your ear to your horse's right flank, you will hear a lot of noise going on, and that tells us that the gut microbes are active, that they are producing a certain amount of gas, because you will only get noises if there's gas being produced, and you'll only have gas being produced if the microbes are doing their job. So gut noises are good. So the food goes into the cecum, it's getting churned up with all these gut microbes, and because the food is going into the cecum about 90-95% liquid, that cecum can act like a reservoir for food and water for the horse should he have to flee from a predator or we start working him hard. From the cecum, the food goes into the large colon, and to illustrate the large colon, I have some industrial grade Hoover hose. Now, the reason why I've chosen a Hoover hose to illustrate this is a Hoover hose has got wire coiled around it so that when you put the vacuum cleaner on, it doesn't suck the pipe flat and stop the dirt going up. You didn't know you'd get a lesson in domestic cleaning. In the horse's digestive tract, we've got bands of connective tissue around the organs to prevent them getting too distended with that gas that's produced. So bands of connective tissue maintain the integrity of the gut, stop it getting overinflated, and allow the food to pass through. When the food passes through the small intestine, because it's a lot smaller and it's got a strong muscular wall, muscular action called peristalsis squeezes the food through. Once we get to the hindgut, because the gut is so much bigger, any effect of any muscle in the gut wall is a lot less because of the increased size of the gut. So we're relying now more on the fact that food coming in is pushing forward food that was there before. So if the horse keeps eating, his food keeps moving through his gut. What can happen is the horse might have a long period of not eating. As we said before, water is gradually being withdrawn from the gut, and we can get a situation where if we're not looking after the horse properly, feeding him and watering him, the food in his gut can get so dry that in the end it can't get round a bend and we get an impaction colic. Some people might say that the horse's gut has design faults in it. I would say the horse suffers from mismanagement. So this is the large colon, and this lies mostly on the right-hand side of the horse. It comes out of the cecum, goes down the horse's belly, as far as the girth, doubles back on itself, comes back again. This bit can also get ulcers, hindgut ulcers or acidosis, but they're incredibly difficult to diagnose. We can now put, well not we, clever vets can, put gastroscopes down the horse's throat to look at their stomach, and then put all sorts of horrible objects up the other end to have a look there. But the horse's large colon is completely out of reach of anything like that. So the only way really we can tell if the horse has a problem in his hindgut is by the things that he tells us and shows us. So he might be girthy. You know, if you've got a sore hindgut, you wouldn't want somebody tightening a girth around it. He might be sore on his right-hand side. Some horses might be reluctant to take right lead and canter, for instance, because it means they're compressing a bit that's not feeling very comfortable. Sometimes horses with acidosis might have runny droppings, or what we call fecal water, which is water that comes out after the droppings. But be aware that when they post-mortem horses, they will find as many have hindgut ulcers as have stomach ulcers. So that's our large colon. As the food goes through the hindgut, say gradually it's having all that excess water removed, and it's gradually becoming more like the droppings that we're familiar with shoveling up. Now, my last bit of hindgut is the small colon, and most of this lies within the horse's pelvic area. Now, my Hoover hose has its wire on this one very close together. In the horse's small colon, the bands of connective tissue are a little bit further apart, and it's at the end of this that the food is actually formed into the boluses that we see in the droppings. The horse's guts aren't anchored specifically in certain areas of their body, as our guts might be. They can move around. And this is a really good adaptive feature, because it means that when the horse is galloping away from a predator, his sloppy guts will move backwards and forwards. So when he's galloping and his front legs land, there's like a brake going on, and the guts will push forward. This helps expel air from the lungs. And as he extends in stride, his guts relatively slip back, put negative pressure on the diaphragm, and air is drawn in. If you've ridden a horse, particularly on a cold day when you can see his breath on the air, you'll realise that when you're cantering, the horse's breathing is in time with his canter. Some horses have that little snorty thing called high blowing, which is like music. And again, that's in rhythm with the stride of the canter. So as the leading leg lands, a little snort. So the guts moving backwards and forwards are acting like a bellows, helping him breathe, so he's then got more energy to go into his muscles to achieve successful flight from the predator. The guts also need to move around to allow the foal to develop. Foals are born about 1/10 of the dam's weight, and with all the water and membranes added in, it adds 1/3 to her weight, so that's a lot, because the foal has to be able to run with its mum almost as soon as it's born. So a 1-hour-old foal is capable of galloping, which is fairly extraordinary compared with other species. So the foal has to be very mature and to develop a lot. If the guts couldn't move out of the way, there wouldn't be room for that foal to develop. When the mare gets to about 4.5 months in her gestation, the foal or the fetus is now too big to stay within the pelvic area, and it slips over the pelvis into the abdomen. But remember that cecum, that's filling up a lot of space on the right-hand side. So the foal is pushed a little bit to the left. So when the mare first starts to really look in foal, you'll notice that the foal sticks out more on her near side than her off side. And now you know why, it's all down to the cecum. Later on, she just looks enormous. We as people have also taken advantage of the horse having movable guts, because the last part of the small colon, which is the rectum, just happens to be about the same length as a vet's arm. So they can put his arm in there, and because it all moves around, he can move around, he can feel for different parts of the horse's internal anatomy, he can check out reproductive tract, kidneys, he can feel different parts of the gut. For instance, if a horse has grass sickness, which I hope none of you experience, but it does happen, because the stomach gets a bit bloated, it pushes the pancreas back. So if the vet can feel the pancreas, as one of the ways of diagnosing a grass sickness case. So that takes us almost to the end. The horse will store up what is now droppings in the rectum until it feels like doing a pile of droppings. The book tells us that the horse does 8 to 12 piles a day. I mean, you've all done poo picking, I'm sure, so you'll know it's more like 20 a day. I would say 12 would be a minimum for good health if the horse has got a sufficiently high forage diet. So then the horse does these piles of droppings and we come along, shovel them up, put them on our barrow, and that, thank you, is how the food got from the bucket to the barrow. So thank you for listening this far, and I'll be able to take some questions.